Thank you, parents, for coming and taking an interest in this unique challenge that every parent across the globe is facing right now, which is how do we help our kids get through a global pandemic in one piece? So, today I'll be talking about our young kids and what they need from us as we face this unusual situation alongside them. So, what I want to focus on today is some of what we know promotes resiliency in our young kids facing the global pandemic. And then I want to hear from you, not only questions that you have, but also what you're learning from your kids as you and your kids are navigating this pandemic together. So, I do specialize in treating children with histories of trauma, and COVID is trauma, but I don't specialize in global pandemics, and I don't think many of us do. This is kind of, I mean, the last time we faced the situation was 1918, and parenting is different now than it was then. So I say that because I really do value any insight that you as parents wish to add to this conversation. Along those lines, I feel like I always need to make a disclaimer that I think you should keep in mind when I'm speaking or when anyone else is speaking to you about children. There's pretty much nothing that is global and universal. So if I say something that you know wouldn't work for your kid, you know your kid, trust yourself. So I just kind of want to lay that as foundation. So I entitled this talk, Feeling Safe When the Sky is Falling, Parenting Young Children During a Global Pandemic. And I chose this title because I think it captures what our job is with our kids right now. The pandemic is a storm, and they need us to shield them from the storm, and they need to feel safe and connected. So I'm sure I am not saying anything that you don't know when I say that parenting during a pandemic is incredibly difficult. And so is being a kid during a global pandemic. I think none of us predicted this, or at least I certainly didn't. And we're often in a position of trying to figure this out the best we can as we go. But we do know more than we think we do. You know your kids, and collectively, we know about trauma. We know what trauma does to kids, but we also know what buffers and protects them. So we might be in a better position than we think we are. So parenting during a pandemic is less than ideal, but you can shield your kids from the storm of the pandemic and they can come out stronger. So I want to say here too, I think anytime we're talking about what you can be doing for your kids, it's really tempting to be hard on yourself about it and to be thinking about all the ways that you're not following this advice, all the ways that you're not living up to what you think you should as a parent. And before we really start unpacking pandemic stuff, I want to remind you that kids do not need perfect parents. Kids need parents who love them and who are trying. And if you're that, you're good enough. So, as I move forward and start to give you suggestions and talk about how you can do these things, the last thing you need to be doing is using this to stress yourself out more. I'm sure you're stressed enough. Okay. So, the crux of what I want to be talking about today is that parenting towards resilience means that we're neither minimizing the impact of the pandemic on our kids, nor are we catastrophizing and thinking that this is more than our kids can handle. It's hard, but our kids are strong and they have us. So I'll start unpacking it a little bit. COVID is a chronic trauma, and it's a situation that's impacting every one of us and every one of our children. Chronic trauma is repeated trauma. I often use poverty or living in war zones as examples. So, if you're growing up in poverty, you might have awesome parents who love you and would do anything for you. but there's kind of this background stressor going on, right? Of not knowing if your family's needs will be met or if you're going to be okay. So that's what COVID is like. It's kind of constant, it's in the background, it's not your parents' fault. Your parents can't fix it. And the solutions to it are not apparent or necessarily possible. So for our little kids, a lot has gotten shaken up. They're not feeling very safe, partly because of what they hear about the pandemic or how the pandemic has impacted their families, and partly because so much of what helps our little kids to feel secure, like predictability, has been undermined. We've had these long stretches, and I think even now, you kind of don't know until pretty late in the day if your kid goes to school tomorrow, because even if your school's open, you don't know if you're getting that call that your kid's on quarantine. So, the other major thing that I've seen happen with our kids is many of our little kids have essentially peeked behind the curtain and discovered that adults don't have it all figured out. You're not supposed to know that when you're 4. You're supposed to know that when you're 14, perhaps, but not when you're 4. Perhaps more than anything, all of our kids found out that the world can suddenly change all of a sudden without warning. And that's scary, especially when you're young. It's scary for us as adults too. So this is hard, and I'm sure that many of you have seen some regression in your children. There might be going back to some earlier developmental stuff. They might be clinging to you more, needing more from you emotionally, having more anxiety. You might be seeing things like bedwetting. So I want to say, I know that this is concerning. It's serious, it's difficult, it's hard to parent. But I also want to encourage you not to panic. If your child is showing some symptoms during the pandemic, don't hesitate to reach out for professional support, check in with our Head Start teacher, ask their pediatrician, but also don't panic. It is normal to have trauma responses to traumatic events. So it doesn't mean that there's something wrong. It means that your kid is going through something and that your child is having normal human reactions to difficult and unpredictable times. I say that because I hear from some parents of, my kid's never going to be okay, or there's something horribly wrong. And the truth is, it is hard. There are symptoms, but it's okay. Don't panic. We'll do the things that we know to do when kids are experiencing the effects of trauma. And kids get through hard things. Like, kids are really amazing at finding their way through. And if you're the kind of parent who is logging onto webinars and trying to figure out how to support their kid through it, like, trust me, it's not going to be smooth. It's not going to be easy, but it'll be okay. You and your kid can get there. So the next sort of section I want to talk about is helping resiliency by acknowledging that things are hard for our kids and trusting that they will come through this. Our young kids need us. And if you see COVID as the sky falling, your job is to be an umbrella for your little ones. So they need you to shield them from the storm. The main way that we're going to do this is, some of this is going to sound basic. It's going to be stuff that you're already doing. And if you feel like, I already do all of this, I hope you're not disappointed. I hope you're able to say, wait, I've got this. I'm doing better than maybe I think I am. With our little ones, we need to be focusing on connection. Their connection, their bond to us, is what makes them feel safe, secure, loved. If you are able to figure out every day, how am I connecting to my little one? What am I doing to make my little one feel loved and bonded to me? Your kid's going to be doing all right through all this. One of the best ways to do this with our littles is to play. If you are down on the floor for 15 minutes a day, if you don't have 15 minutes, do 5, like, do what you can. I know it's not easy right now. You get on the floor, you figure out what your kid wants to play, and you let them play. This helps your kid connect and bond to you more than most other things we do. And it is the language of childhood. So it gives you a window into what's going on with your kid. We'll talk about this later. This is going to be a time when you're finding out what is your kid thinking about this COVID stuff? How are they feeling about it? And what are their fears? You can put this into something that's routine that your child can rely on, even if it is only for 5 minutes. That you always do this after bath time, or you always do it before dinner, or whatever works for your family. By doing this, you're helping your child to feel connected to you and loved. And also, you're introducing a little bit of predictability back into their day. So, that is the next thing I want to emphasize. Life during a pandemic is incredibly unpredictable, but in our parenting, there's a lot that we can do. Kids feel safer when they know what is happening next. And a lot of that gets disrupted in a pandemic. It's not only kids that feel safer. I think that's what makes the pandemic so difficult for many of us adults, myself included, is just not really knowing what's going to happen next, or when it's going to happen, or what will happen after that. So with kids, we want to try to make things feel predictable. You want to up the aspect of ritual in the home. So that can be little things like you always sing "You Are My Sunshine" when you go wake your kid up. Or if it's a variety of caregivers, it's not always you waking your kid up. Anyone who wakes your kid up can always sing "You Are My Sunshine." Or just other, I'm not saying that that's what you need to do, but I think the principle of you want kids to have these little rituals and things that they know will happen, that always happen, it really helps them to settle and feel secure. You can keep a routine that applies throughout pandemic changes. So you can always sing in the morning. You can always have the same morning routine, whether or not it's a school day or a homeschool day. You can also get really creative with this. One mom I work with who has 8 kids. Um, so 8 kids during lockdown, she had to get creative and do her best. And this mom created a color sheet for each day. So she had her kids were many were in foster care. So on her, she would have like a picture of a red day that would have a picture of me on a tablet, the teacher on a tablet, and the bio parent on a tablet. And then a picture of a green day that would have a picture of my office, a picture of school, a picture of where the child goes to visit the bio parent. So that she found it settled her kids to be able to, first thing in the morning, say, okay, guys, today's a green day, and have her kids go and look and say, okay, this is what it means that today is a green day. Okay. So, to sum all that up, what we're trying to do is offer our kids the bond that they have with us. There's so much that we can't control, but we keep offering the kids their bond with us. And I'll elaborate on this in a minute, but it's not just in the time of a pandemic where kids are scared about our well-being. We're not just offering us, we're offering our system. So it's our family gets through things together. There is a village looking out for you, kiddo. Okay. I'm going to shift to some of the more specific issues that come up during this strange time of parenting during a pandemic. So I've talked about the general stance that you want to be taking with your kids, the things you want to be focusing on to ensure that you and your kids are connecting and getting through the best way possible. So now I'm going to go to some of the more specific pandemic issues. The first is how you talk about this with kids. The first thing I'm going to say is you have to talk to kids about the pandemic. Your kid has thoughts and feelings about this, and whether or not they're telling you that, that is the case. So the best place to be starting is with your child's own thoughts and feelings and perhaps misunderstandings. Playtime is I always think the best way in with our young kids, they're going to play about what's bugging them. So if you are doing what I suggested of finding times to play with your child, you can be listening for pandemic themes and you can even invite it a little bit. So I have, I have masks for the stuffed animals in my playroom. I have a COVID stuffed animal too, um, that kids love to throw at me and things like that. Um, and I also have some stuffed vaccines. So like these are things that are in the playroom. So they're sort of there for kids to pick up and play with and communicate what's going on. But you can explore what's going on with your kids through their play. Of course, if it never comes up, you can just ask them, so what do you think about this coronavirus stuff? Um, but my experience is if we are playing regularly with kids, they really do take that up as a way to communicate with us. So, what I think is so important with starting with listening and finding out what your child's specific concerns are, there are a million ways that especially little kids can take up the pandemic that we would not expect. So it helps me to know if a kid is playing about a little girl's mom and dad dying of COVID, then I need to be having a different conversation with that child than a kid who plays about a little girl being bad and COVID coming to punish her, right? So those are different. And these are both things I've seen and heard about from kids. So knowing, hey, what is this kid worried about? Or are they playing about their school closing and they never go back, right? That's a different kind of conversation to be having with a child. With our little ones, we need to be listening for personalized fantasies. This is one of the big surprises. It shouldn't have surprised me knowing what I know about young kids and how they think, but I've had multiple children think that they or their families caused the pandemic. I'm talking the 3, 4, 5 year olds who are still young enough that like maybe they're mad at you when it rains, right? So these kids, I've had kids think that their abuser created the pandemic to hurt them because they can't hurt them anymore. And I've had kids think that they got sick and that it shut down the world, and everything in between. So once you hear what is it that's bothering your kid, what is your kid thinking? What does your kid want to know? Then you got to start answering that. And there's a balance here. We need to be reassuring, but we need to be honest. So I think often with our young kids, we tend to focus on reassuring, and we need to do that. But only saying it's going to be okay doesn't tend to reduce anxiety. And it's true for us as adults. So I'll put it this way. If there are all these rumors that your company is about to go under and that you're going to lose your job, and you ask your boss about it, and your boss is like, no, it's fine. It doesn't really tell you what you need to know. It doesn't really answer or help you reduce your anxiety. So, what you need to hear from your boss is why your boss doesn't think that that's happening. And you probably also need to be planning or thinking ahead to, well, what would I do? How would I be okay if that happened? So, along those lines, we have to monitor how loud we're being with our own anxiety and fear. Um, this can be a scary, confusing time for us adults in all sorts of ways, but we really want to be mindful of what we're presenting to our kids, letting them know that it's hard, but mom and dad or grandpa and grandma or whoever it is taking care of this kid has got it. So, for example, if a kid is playing that mom and dad die and they're alone, and this is a conversation you're having, you need to be saying both, I don't think that your mom or I will die because we're both young and healthy, or whatever your reasons are for thinking that it's probably going to be okay. We're taking precautions. But you also have to add, our family pulls together no matter what. And our family will always be here to take care of you. So you're not promising, you don't say, oh, well, I'm not going to die, because kids think like, yeah, okay, but like, what if you do? Right. So you need to be reassuring why you don't think they need to be panicked about that in this particular moment, but also what would happen and how they would still be safe and loved and taken care of if the worst did occur. A lot of kids need to hear this about themselves. A lot of kids are afraid of COVID, and they need to hear that, we are doing what we believe is best for you and keeping you safe from COVID. But if you did get COVID, most kids are okay, and we would take care of you, right? We would be here and we would do everything that we could to help you through that. When I say that we have to be careful about too many reassurances, I also mean that we have to be careful not to promise what we don't know about the pandemic. Like, we're at this weird time, I feel like, where, vaccinations are happening, things are opening up, but I know my own, not like I know any more than anyone else about this, but my own sense is, okay, we'll see, right? Like, we're waiting to find out what happens next. Are there variants? Are there not? What happens? How do things go from here? So I'm not saying to kids school's going to be open in the fall, or that school is not going to be open in the fall. I'm saying I hope it is, and I'm here. Whatever happens, I'm here and I'm listening. So I think as parents, what you're saying is, I don't know what's going to happen. I hope that you get to go to kindergarten, but whatever happens, I love you and I'll help you through whatever it is. I'm here and we've got this. Now, some kids have a lot of questions about what COVID is, and some kids don't so much. What I want to say about that is, when we're talking to kids about it, we can be looking for ways that kids can feel like they're doing something. And I know masking has been a hot topic, and I'm going to talk about addressing different beliefs in a second. But one of the things that I saw my young patients really enjoy was the idea that they can be superheroes, right? So I tried to take some of the sting out of COVID by saying, like, look, it's a virus and it makes people sick, and we don't want everyone getting sick on the same day, because too many people would need to go to the doctor, and that wouldn't be a good thing. And a lot of parents would tie that into the masking and say, that's why our family wears masks. The virus spreads when we cough or sneeze. And it's super cool because we get to be heroes just by covering our nose and mouth. And a lot of my very little patients, like the 3, 4, 5s, they were super into that idea of feeling like they could do something, that they could do something about it. Now, I know that a lot of kids have had difficulties wearing masks, but what I have found is, if I go through that same process that we just talked about, and again, there are exceptions, like there are kids on the spectrum where just wearing a mask is not going to work for them, right? It just isn't. And I get that. But for a lot of kids, and most of my patients have post-traumatic stress kinds of things going on for them. So they might have trauma memories associated with their face being covered, things like that. What I found is, if we take their concerns seriously and we listen, like, okay, you don't like how it feels on your face, or you don't like the smell, or then we're able to come up with solutions together of essential oils or a mask that fits differently or is made of a different material. And kids are able to kind of troubleshoot that and get through. Just a few more things I want to address, and then we can open it up for questions. But I feel one of the big challenges right now is addressing different beliefs. I've had a lot of children in a lot of distress about the contradiction that they're seeing. Like, Mom tells me I have to wear a mask, but when we go to the store, no one else is. I had a child ask me, who's trying to kill me, my teachers or my parents? And when we're trying to be an umbrella, it doesn't matter how much you disagree with your neighbor. We're trying not to terrify the kids. So, the tenor of the answer that I would suggest is basically no one's trying to kill you, but essentially mom and dad, our family knows what's best for our family, right? So what you're saying to the kid is we don't really need to worry about them, but we know what's best and safest for our family. So that's what we're going to be doing. And if you're a teacher and you have kids coming in whose parents are anti-mask and you need them to wear a mask in school, you can kind of do the same thing of at school, we know how to keep you kids safe here. And so that's what we do here. Right. So you're not saying anything to suggest that their parent is wrong. Even if you think their parent's wrong, you're allowed to. But I don't want to put that on kids and have them feel like they have to choose which adults or which attachment figures are good and bad. The kid can't change it anyhow. So I'm going to try to umbrella over that as much as I can. Now, the last thing I wanted to bring up before I see what I missed that parents want to talk about is the issue of screen time with our littles. Prior to the pandemic, I remember this moment a couple months in where I was recommending to children and youth services that they buy a 5-year-old a tablet. And I'm like, who am I? Who am I? Because before the pandemic, it was like, I was really encouraging people to limit screen time for young kids. A few things about that with our little kids, sometimes you as parents just have to say, this is too much. If your child is expected to be on a screen for 7 hours a day, every day, and your kid is tanking, it's okay to call it and say, like, hey, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and then we're done. I also find that we have to remember that young bodies need to move. Our little kids they can't sit still through this webinar, right? Like we know this. And I think that because of that, if you have a kid who needs to be on a tablet a lot or on a device a lot, I prefer something that they can hold and move their bodies with. So a lot of therapy sessions that I've done on Zoom, I kind of get seasick a little, but the kids are running around and they're taking the tablet with them. So I think we need to remember, okay, your academics are really important, but you're little and your body needs to do the things that little people's bodies need to do. And we have to remember that. And I'm going to conclude by kind of returning to my introduction of saying, this is hard, but don't panic. When we panic, we tend to do things like you have to be on track and when you learn your alphabet, so you must sit in 8 hours of kindergarten every day on a tablet as our kids implode. So if we kind of relax, remember this is hard. It's a moment in time. It's a long moment in time, and we don't know when it's going to end, but it's okay. If we can kind of be calm about it and give our kids a little bit of space to be where they are. And if as parents, you can remember where your kid is and remember, okay, my kid can't sit still for 6 hours, so I'm not going to try to make them. And I guess my final comment is hang in there, parents. I mean, you're 15, 16 months into this. I know it's hard, but man, I mean, so many of you are really doing your best by your kids, and I know that they appreciate that. So again, just thank you, parents.